Hello and welcome. I'm Kimberly Charrington, and I'd like to welcome each of you on behalf of the National Institute for Deterrence Studies, also known as NIDS, for tuning into today's Huessy seminar. NIDS is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that provides deterrence education by hosting live and virtual events, podcasts, publications on global security, as well as workshops and courses through NIDS Academy, all in the interest of advancing peace and promoting stability through a strong national security and nuclear deterrent. You can see more of what we have to offer and get involved at thinkdeterrence.com. Please help us grow our membership and audiences by following us on LinkedIn, X, Rumble, YouTube, as well as wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Next Friday's Huessy seminar will feature the Chinese nuclear threat and implications for U.S. security with Gordon Chang and Rick Fisher, and we hope to see you there. Also, a couple more events we have coming up. March 28th, Major Power Rivalry and Nuclear Stability with Brad Roberts. May 23rd, we have Ensuring America's Strategic Edge with Major General Stacy Jo Huser. And then we have two live events, and we want to make sure that you can clear your calendar for those. A breakfast with Admiral Johnny Wolf live at the Capitol Hill Club. We'll be speaking on the sea-based U.S. nuclear deterrent and the work of Strategic Systems Program. We also have Uzi Rubin live at the Capitol Hill Club on June 27th, speaking on the growing concerns of missile threats in the Middle East. Now, during our presentation today, we encourage everyone to write questions in the chat box at any time. When we begin the Q&A portion of this presentation, one of us will read your questions that you submitted. However, if you don't get your questions answered, we're going to send it to our guests afterwards, and they'll have a chance to separately message you. You can also email us at nids@thinkdeterrence.com, and we will pass those questions along. I want to introduce our host for today's seminar, Mr. Peter Huessy, President and Senior Director of the Strategic Deterrent Studies at the Geostrategic Analysis and a Senior Fellow here at NIDS. Peter?
Thank you very much, Kimberly, and welcome everybody. Particularly want to say hello to my friend Tom Troiano, who's the Vice President of Systems Planning and Analysis, and Chris Yaw from the University of Nebraska, who is often a speaker at a number of my events and one of the top experts with looking at what are the bad guys doing with respect to building nuclear weapons. Just another reminder, on June 24th at the campus of Louisiana State University in Shreveport, Louisiana, we are hosting a triad conference, and the day after that we will have probably a classified briefing for industry that will be run by Global Strike Command, which we work very closely with on that event. We're honored today to have David J. Trachtenberg, who joined the National Institute for Public Policy in August 2019 as Vice President, which he remains, and then was Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Policy during the previous Trump administration. He was also Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Policy in the George W. Bush administration, and he was Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Forces Policy, who oversaw the office that developed the Nuclear Posture Review and provided policy support for U.S. withdrawal from the ABM Treaty and the initial deployment of a national missile defense capability. He also served on our Services Committee in the House. What's interesting is that David's work on the ABM Treaty and the withdrawal from that is that Boeing has announced they just added another 20 interceptors to our missile fields up in Alaska, which is good news. We're now at 60 rather than 40. And on top of that, David is going to talk to us about, to some degree, that the president's proposal, which is now called the Golden Dome, or it's a derivative kind of idea from the Iron Dome, which is one of the Israeli missile defense systems. So David is going to talk to us about how America might develop air and missile defenses for its own country and get away from the idea that we could only build a limited defense and only against rogue states, Senator Wallop once quipped that what happens if the missile comes from China? Do we just not shoot it down? Which was kind of an interesting point. So, David, over to you, sir. Again, I want to thank you for taking the time to come and talk to us. We welcome you on behalf of NIDS. So take it away, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. I appreciate the introduction greatly. Appreciate the invitation to be here. It's a pleasure to speak to this group, and I appreciate your efforts, Peter, the efforts that NIDS has made and others have made to call attention not only to this issue, but to other vital strategic issues of the day. So thank you very much. What I'd like to do is spend a little time speaking about my latest report on next steps in Homeland Missile Defense, published by the National Institute for Public Policy. And I think a link to that report has, I think, has been provided in the chat window. I wrote this report in light of growing concerns that the United States now faces a greater threat from offensive missiles than ever before. And because this vulnerability of the American homeland creates opportunities for U.S. adversaries to engage in coercive nuclear threats intended to undermine American security. So it seems like now is pretty much an ideal time to reassess missile defense of the homeland and to move forward on improving protection of the American people against growing missile threats. Now, I admit I had to change this report slightly because when I first drafted it, my initial recommendation was to recommend that the president issue a directive prioritizing the need for a more robust homeland missile defense posture. But President Trump obviously beat me to the punch with his executive order on Iron Dome, Peter, which you correctly point out is now referred to as Golden Dome. And of course, I'm glad he did. Missile threats to the U.S. homeland have grown and continue to grow in numbers, types, and sophistication. Consequently, it's no longer reasonable, if it ever was, to argue that allowing the U.S. homeland to remain vulnerable to peer or near peer missile threats from adversaries is a good thing. The notion that national vulnerability equates to international stability is frankly a legacy of Cold War thinking that I argue should be relegated to the proverbial dustbin of history. We're now living in a world where we must deter not just one, but two nuclear peer adversaries, along with North Korea and potentially Iran. In today's world, to paraphrase a former senator and presidential candidate, homeland vulnerability is no virtue and homeland protection is no vice. I think it's important to recognize that both Russia and China have strategic goals and objectives that are diametrically opposed to ours. What do I mean by that? The United States is often considered to be a status quo nation that seeks stability, while both Russia and China are determined to overturn the existing status quo and reorient the international environment and the world order in their favor. This is the antithesis of stability. Both Russia and China have been modernizing and developing newer, more sophisticated missile systems, including not only ballistic missiles, but cruise and hypersonic missiles as well. These systems pose qualitatively new threats to the U.S. homeland. Now, in a world where both Moscow and Beijing, working independently or in concert, are threatening the United States and the West over Ukraine, and Taiwan, it's absolutely imperative to ensure that our citizens are defended not only against the prospect of direct attack, however improbable that may seem, but against coercive threats intended to prevent the United States from taking actions in its own security interest for fear of the potential consequences to our own homeland, and to do so with the sense of urgency it demands. My report highlights several realities of the new environment we're in. It notes the growth in missile threats to the homeland, and it addresses the benefits of homeland missile defense, both for its deterrent effects by complicating any attack plans of a potential aggressor, and its utility in limiting damage in the event deterrence fails, despite our best efforts and for whatever reason. Defense of the homeland also bolsters the credibility of our extended deterrent guarantees to allies. In other words, how credible are our threats to defend NATO allies, even at the risk of nuclear war, if our homeland itself is vulnerable to retaliatory strikes? I think it was Herman Kahn who noted that it's not credible that the United States would commit suicide on behalf of an ally. So, with Russia threatening a wider European war and China threatening Taiwan, the way to improve our supposedly ironclad security guarantees to others is to ensure that our homeland is protected. Now, the report also notes the important role that Congress plays in establishing missile defense policy and funding missile defense programs. And I call on Congress to take legislative action that would align U.S. policy with the President's executive order. In addition, I note that missile defense technology has come a long way since the days of Ronald Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative. And what was once seen as technologically impossible or improbable is now, according to the experts, increasingly possible, including developing and deploying space-based missile defense assets capable of countering missile threats in their boost or ascent phases. And because the most effective way to defend the homeland involves space-based assets, I think there should be a greater role for the U.S. Space Force to play in our homeland missile defense efforts. So, the report outlines a dozen specific recommendations, and I'd like to take a few minutes, if I could, to summarize them here, and then open the floor to questions. First, I call on the administration in the report to submit a budget to Congress that reflects the urgency of implementing the President's Iron Dome or Golden Dome executive order. We all know that policy statements must be backed by implementation measures. That implementation requires resources, and that policy without implementation is really nothing more than wishful thinking. So it's important for the President to submit a budget that actually and adequately funds the programs necessary to make this Golden Dome a reality. I also suggest that it's not at all necessary for the administration to conduct a full-fledged missile defense review like the one that was conducted in 2019. These strategic reviews take an inordinate amount of time and lead to tremendous bureaucratic debates that often delay action and result in lowest common denominator solutions or outcomes. Look, the President has made clear. He's made his wishes known, and it's up to the bureaucracy to implement that effectively and with the urgency it deserves. Perhaps most importantly, I think it's critical to acknowledge the importance of a space-based missile defense layer, including both sensors and shooters that can counter offensive missiles in their early stages of flight, well before they approach U.S. territory, and to submit a budget request that appropriately funds the development of both kinetic and non-kinetic space-based defensive programs. Now, although a space-based missile defense layer to protect the nation is admittedly a longer-term prospect, the groundwork, I think, must be laid now to allow research and development of kinetic and non-kinetic defensive means to move forward expeditiously. And this includes space-based interceptors, as well as directed energy systems that may have utility against multiple types of offensive missiles. And perhaps there are lessons that can be learned from Israel's own Iron Beam experience that might be applicable to this. I also recommend in the report bolstering the missile defense role of the U.S. Space Force and having the Secretary of Defense designate the Chief of Space Operations, for example, as the senior U.S. official responsible for designing and developing an integrated air and missile defense system for the United States. Organizational stovepipes and bureaucratic posturing among competing communities of interest, including the services, combatant commands, and the Missile Defense Agency, have created impediments to progress in improving U.S. homeland missile defenses. The creation of the Space Force opens up the possibility of alleviating these impediments by assigning responsibility for the Homeland Defense mission to a single service with an understanding of the critical importance of space to national defense and the responsibility to protect the nation from space. This could also enhance opportunities to integrate space-based missile defense systems into an integrated missile defense architecture. Designating the Chief of Space Operations as a key developer of a homeland missile defense architecture would actually be consistent with the fiscal year 2025 NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, which requires a single senior level point of contact to oversee service budgets, strategy, and acquisition and sustainment of an integrated air and missile defense architecture to ensure the defense of the nation against missile threats. In addition, I advocate that Congress should amend U.S. missile defense policy in the NDAA to allow for homeland missile defense protection against missiles of any type in all phases of flight and regardless of launch location. This includes clearly supporting space-based missile defense capabilities and changing or revoking any policy statement in law that either explicitly or implicitly endorses exclusive reliance on strategic deterrence to defend the nation against strategic missile threats from nuclear peer adversaries. Now, although the language in the FY 2025 NDAA is generally supportive of missile defense activities, congressional support for a more robust homeland missile defense posture should be explicitly authorized in legislation and should be proposed by the administration in its fiscal year 2026 budget submission. This includes policy direction to move forward expeditiously on both terrestrial and space-based elements of a homeland missile defense system, including space-based kinetic and non-kinetic intercept systems. The FY25 NDA also codifies in Title 10 a statement saying it is the policy of the United States to rely on nuclear deterrence to address more sophisticated and larger quantity near-peer intercontinental missile threats to the homeland of the United States. Now, my concern with a statement such as that, as a congressional policy statement, is that it may actually, a statement like that codified in law may actually disincentivize industry from developing capabilities that may be perceived as inconsistent with policy guidelines established by law. In other words, saying that it is U.S. policy to rely on strategic deterrence to protect the homeland from strategic missile threats from pure nuclear adversaries could inadvertently have a negative impact on our ability to develop the kinds of more robust missile defense capabilities that we need to actually protect the homeland. In fact, it may also generate concerns, if not downright opposition, to improving missile defenses against rogue state threats like North Korea, if such improvements might also produce some latent capability against Russia or China's nuclear arsenal, contrary to U.S. policy. So I think Congress should clarify this issue to avoid any confusion. The report makes other recommendations regarding terrestrial-based capabilities, including support for deploying a third missile defense site in the United States to augment the existing ground-based interceptor sites in Fort Greely, Alaska, and Vandenberg Space Force Base, California. This would be consistent with the fiscal year 25 NDAA, though it's not a near-term solution to the more immediate problem of defending the nation against growing missile threats from multiple adversaries. I think it's also important to proceed with hardware and software upgrades to the 44 currently deployed GBIs to improve their capability to defend against rogue state missile threats from North Korea or Iran. The capabilities of the GBIs are extremely limited and are not terribly effective against more sophisticated missile threats, but they can be augmented with hardware and software modifications to help improve their capability to counter non-ballistic missile threats. I also recommend expediting development and deployment of the next generation interceptor, NGI, with multiple kill vehicles as an adjunct to and ultimately replacement for GBI. Though it's not an ideal solution to the homeland defense problem, deployment of NGI can nevertheless be accelerated, I think, and it can serve as one element of a layered defense system. My report also calls for upgrading the Standard Missile 3 Block 2A interceptor to provide it with an anti-ICBM capability. Despite a successful test of this capability 5 years ago, little has really been done since to improve the anti-ICBM capabilities of the SM-3. The Trump administration should direct the Navy to upgrade the SM-3 Block 2A interceptor to provide this enhanced capability and should propose funding for the upgrade program in its FY26 budget submission. And I suggest deploying terminal high altitude area defense, THAAD interceptors, as part of what's been called a defensive underlayer to protect critical installations in the United States, including nuclear command and control sites and selected ICBM deployment locations. Deployment of THAAD interceptors to protect the homeland would contribute to an effective layered homeland missile defense architecture. Now, finally, there are a couple of other recommendations in my report, such as employing unmanned aerial systems and manned fighter aircraft such as the F-35 with advanced interceptors that could be used for boost phase defense, and expediting the development of kinetic and non-kinetic intercept technologies to defeat hypersonic missile threats. With both Russia and China developing offensive hypersonic missiles, including the Oreshnik, which Russia characterizes as a hypersonic missile that can evade U.S. missile defenses, the United States must accelerate the development of systems that can effectively counter hypersonic missile threats. So where does this leave us? Well, I think it's important to recognize that progress in homeland missile defense has been unfortunately stymied by outdated Cold War notions, declining funding, lack of prioritization, organizational and bureaucratic roadblocks, and frankly, ideologically based political opposition. Reluctance to improve active defenses for the nation has been evident throughout successive administrations, both Republican and Democratic. In light of the growing threats to U.S. security from both peer nuclear adversaries and rogue states, I think the time has really come to abandon the outdated thinking that American vulnerability to missile attack is a stabilizing feature of the international environment. It is not. The U.S. homeland is more vulnerable than ever to offensive missile strikes from all kinds of missiles, ballistic, cruise, and hypersonic. America's main rivals are seeking to overturn the existing U.S.-led international order and are using their expanding nuclear weapons capabilities to underpin their more aggressive behavior and coercive threats. Allowing the homeland missile defense status quo to continue is no longer a prudent option, if it ever was. Multiple administrations and multiple secretaries of defense have said that defense of the homeland is the nation's top priority. Yet, the Missile Defense Agency's budget has been relatively stagnant for years. The requested budget for missile defense activities represents only around 3% of the overall defense budget request. The MDA budget request is barely 1% of the overall defense budget request. And if you look at the amount proposed for homeland missile defense for that mission, we're talking about roughly 0.003% of the total. This, to me, hardly reflects a level of effort commensurate with what repeatedly is said to be the Department of Defense's top priority. The time has come, I think, to ensure that the United States is not self-deterred from protecting its national security interests by coercive nuclear threats. The Trump administration, working with Congress, has an opportunity, a real opportunity, to move beyond archaic, outdated, simplistic Cold War notions of stability and actually take steps to defend the American people against growing missile threats. Hopefully, this particular report will help illuminate the reasons why this is necessary and hopefully help generate some support necessary to successfully implement the president's directive. Let me stop there with appreciation for allowing me to share my thoughts, and I'm happy to turn the discussion back over to the host.
Thank you very much, David. You had mentioned a number of policies that you want to see in the fiscal 26 and 25 NDAAs, because there's a contradiction there. I understand what you're saying. One of my questions in the chat is, would you amend the Missile Defense Act to reflect what you're proposing?
If by the Missile Defense Act, you're talking about the congressional Missile Defense Act legislation.
Yeah.
I would amend that to more explicitly support and align with, I think, where the Trump administration is seeking to go on homeland missile defense. I would certainly amend, if not sort of remove the language that's in there that suggests that the United States, as a matter of policy, the United States will rely on strategic deterrence to deal with the more substantial threats, missile threats posed by Russia and China. Should be part of an overall strategy, but we should also Congress should also allow for more aggressive active defense of the homeland as part of that deterrence policy. So to me, and I know there are some that will say, well, it's just an expression of policy by Congress. It's just an expression of congressional sentiment. The difficulty I have with that argument, Peter, is that it's embedded in law. So it's a policy statement that is now legally part of legislation signed by the president that is essentially legally binding. So I think it's imperative for Congress to sort of clarify the issue in a way that makes very clear that it is U.S. policy to more robustly defend the homeland against missile threats launched from anywhere, rogue states, nuclear near peer states, anywhere in any stages of flight. I think that should be a relatively easy fix that aligns congressional policy language with where the Trump administration is seeking to go.
Okay. Related to that, one of my questions in the chat was that it's long been held by the disarmament community and others that the ABM Treaty was the cornerstone of American strategic stability because it left us vulnerable. But there's a corollary to that, and critics of missile defense have said this is what Uzi Rubin calls fortune cookie analysis. And they said, first the shield, then the sword, meaning your missile defense really is part of an offensive strategy to attack the other guy first and then soak up the response with missile defense. Would you address that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate the question. Look, the ABM Treaty was intended to do several things. Among them, it was intended to essentially halt the growth by the Soviet Union in their large strategic counterforce capabilities. The thinking was if we leave the nation vulnerable, then there is no reason for an opponent, in that particular case, the Soviet Union at the time, to continue to massively build up offensive missile capabilities because there's no shield for them to penetrate, in essence. That logic basically was proven to be false because the greatest buildup in Soviet offensive nuclear capabilities targeted against the United States came after the signing of the ABM Treaty, which is intended to leave our nation vulnerable. So, that to me is an absolutely bogus argument. And I think the argument that we need a shield so that we can contemplate striking first, being able to mop up some kind of a strike on us later misses the point. How reliable do we think deterrence is likely to be in the current situation or in the future? If there's a risk that deterrence may fail, doesn't it make sense, both morally, as well as strategically, to try to develop some kind of protection for the American people? Who was it that said, isn't it better to defend Americans than to kill Russians? There are a whole variety of reasons, I think, why missile defense for the homeland makes strong sense strategically, morally, and otherwise.
Right. There are two questions in the chat I'd like to. One is from our president, Jim Petrosky, about an interesting question about whether building the national missile defense, is that going to interfere with extended deterrence as well as providing missile defenses for our allies in Europe, like we've done with Romania and Poland and South Korea and Japan, for example? Could you address that issue?
Sure. And I think that's a great question, and no doubt there are some concerns about if we go forward with a more robust, more effective homeland missile defense for the nation, what effect that might have on extended deterrence. I see these two things as complementary, okay, not in opposition. Being able to defend our homeland, I believe, adds credibility to our extended deterrence commitments and the threats that we might make to protect allies if our allies are attacked, because it's just not, it strikes me, it's not credible to extend a deterrent to another country if we leave ourselves here at home vulnerable to retaliatory strikes from an aggressor. So I see these two things as complementary. I support missile defenses in a NATO context. I support them in a U.S. homeland defense context. To me, yeah, there's no contradiction there. I think we should look at homeland defense as a way of not only bolstering the safety and security of our own citizenry, but of also improving the credibility of the security guarantees that we give to so many other nations around the world.
Agreed. Nathan Hurd, who is one of our attendees, has an interesting question. He says, are you concerned about the defense industrial base's ability to support the president's Golden Dome strategy? And in light of that, what obstacles exist, do you think, and what could the government do to mitigate them?
Yeah, I think those are also both very, very good questions. The first part of that, in terms of the defense industrial base, yes, I do have concerns, clearly, about the industrial base's ability to support the president's Golden Dome strategy. I think, if nothing else, our support for Ukraine in the current conflict in Europe has exposed weaknesses in our own defense industrial base that really need to be addressed on an urgent basis. So, yes, that is an issue. In terms of the obstacles that exist and how the government can mitigate them, frankly, I have to say, I think the biggest obstacle to doing what I think we should do on homeland missile defense has to do with our own internal bureaucracy and bureaucratic impediments to progress. There are an awful lot of antibodies within the Pentagon and elsewhere within the government that are still thinking about this issue in the context of what I think is a Cold War framework and mindset, that defenses would be destabilizing and we shouldn't go there. So I think there's a tremendous amount of bureaucratic opposition. Yes, the defense industrial base is an issue. Yes, we need to pay attention to that, and we need to identify the shortfalls in the industrial base. We need to fix the problems that exist with supply chains and the like. We need to devote the necessary resources in order to solve some of these issues. But beyond that, I think we also need to try to figure out how we overcome the bureaucratic and organizational resistance to a stronger, greater homeland missile defense posture. Because the opposition is there, frankly. And look, even the individual services, have other priorities. In the budget debates, the issue of homeland missile defense generally gets short shrift. But these are all the impediments, I think, to progress that need to be addressed holistically.
I have to run, as you know, but I apologize, but I have one additional question. Part of the reason Homeland Missile Defense gets, I think, goes to near the bottom of the list was, well, we've got nuclear deterrence and extended deterrence, and that'll work. On the other hand, there are those who have complained that General Hyten and Brad Roberts talking about escalate to win, which is a strategy of using a very limited number of nuclear weapons to coerce us or blackmail the United States and its allies to stand down. And it's interesting, the Posture Commission has echoed that. However, what I don't see was quite interesting is in 1999, in April, Yeltsin issued a decree and he said, I want you to develop battlefield nuclear weapons that are very accurate and very low yield so that we can use them to basically win. And the question in my mind is, and as I'll leave you with this, is did Mr. Putin, who followed Mr. Yeltsin, take that seriously? Have they developed such weapons? And does that fit into the escalate to win strategy? That's a loaded question but I think that's what mentally is difficult for people to understand. There is a new paradigm, which the Russians and I believe the Chinese have adopted it as well, that makes missile defense far more important and so critically necessary. So I'll leave it at that. And David, I want to thank you on behalf of NIDS. I want to turn it over to Jim Petrovsky, my president, and he will take it from here.
Sure. Thank you, Peter. I appreciate it.
So if you could address that issue, and we'll turn it over.
Yeah, sure. In fact, I think Peter is correct on this. And I think anything that allows either Russia or China to believe that they have some kind of exploitable advantage, is frankly dangerous dangerous for international stability. And I think, at least in Russia's case, the unclassified estimates that are out there suggest that in terms of the non-strategic nuclear weapons, Russia may have at least a 10-to-1 advantage over the United States. Now, if that makes the Russian leadership believe that they can coercively threaten the United States because they have an exploitable advantage like that, then I think that's a bad position for the United States to be in. My concern is also that both Russia and China are doing more collaboratively now in the military sphere. They're holding joint exercises. They're developing capabilities jointly, and frankly, their overall, as I said in my remarks, their overall objective is basically to unseat the United States as the world's dominant power, and to basically recast the international order in their favor, which works against U.S. security interests. So yeah, I think the point Peter has raised is a good one, is an appropriate one, and I think it compels the United States not only on the defensive side of the equation, but with respect to our nuclear deterrent as well, to undertake the measures and to support the funding for the necessary modernization and programs that are necessary to ensure that U.S. adversaries and opponents don't think that, in essence, they can get away with coercing the United States to stand down because they have some kind of exploitable advantage. So I agree. That's a valid concern.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And in deterrence, we always say that the adversary gets a vote, and so we just don't know what the Russians are going to do. So that's a major issue. So yeah, we have a couple other questions. We have one over in the Q&A. I want to highlight from Jeff Larson, who says, given the number of executive decisions by the new administration, it's been a challenge to keep up. Can you tell if there's more information available or a publication about the Iron Dome proposal or the Golden Dome proposal now?
Yeah, that's a great question. You're right. There has been a rush of executive orders and directives and proclamations emanating from the White House. I haven't yet seen anything more substantive, I guess, beyond what's in the president's executive order on Iron Dome for America. I think part of the flurry of activity has to do with the fact that I believe one of the lessons that President Trump took from his first term was that if you want to get anything done, you need to do it quickly. You need to move out rapidly, because the longer it takes, the longer you delay, the greater opportunity there is for those that are opposed to the policies that you're trying to implement, the greater the opportunity is for them to try to throw monkey wrenches into the process. But I would expect, of course, as part of the executive order, there was, I think, a 60-day study or report that the Secretary of Defense has to produce. I think, that may offer some additional insights when that report comes out, if it's released publicly.
Yeah, David, thank you. And regarding that and the comment or the question that was asked earlier about the industrial base, the industry just can't, flip a switch and start, building with you've got a 4-year window if you're just going to think of the Trump administration under an executive order. So there's a lot of investment that 4 years from now could change. What is your recommendation regarding how this unfolds as we move forward as an executive order versus a national program that has congressional backing, et cetera? What's your view on that?
Well, the national program that has congressional backing should I would hope last more than a 4-year term of the administration. The executive order, I think, was a necessary but not sufficient first step toward moving in that direction. Yes, fixes to the defense industrial base are not only short term but long term in nature. They're going to outlast this administration. There's a lot that we need to do there. There's a lot that we need to do with respect to our nuclear infrastructure, which has decayed over many years. There's a lot that we need to do in terms of the current nuclear modernization program, which again, will take years to actually, come to fruition. Vladimir Putin has said that the Russian strategic modernization program is now at least 95% complete. Okay, the United States has yet to deploy a single new strategic nuclear delivery vehicle. 0 so far. So there's a lot of work to be done. It's going to need prolonged and sustained congressional support, budgetary support, policy support, and the like. So we're looking at something that's not going to be fixed in the near term, but there are steps that can be taken in the near term, and I think I tried to outline some of those in my report. But the executive order is a first step, I think, in that direction.
Thank you, David. No, that's good. Yeah, and let me just sort of go away from the question and answer just to make a couple comments here. First of all, I really enjoyed reading your article. I think it was great. You provide a lot of great recommendations and considerations that I hadn't previously considered. So in case people popping off this seminar early, I strongly encourage you to go to the chat session, click on that article and download it and read it as much as you can. And then the second piece is, permit me to make a supporting comment that Dave and I talked about beforehand. Maybe you can add to this. Is defense is not deterrence, and I think a lot of people in the audience may or may not realize that. But defense makes the adversary basically change their calculus against taking an action and achieving a deterrent effect. And I think sometimes when we talk about defense, those two get disconnected. And maybe you can make a comment, because I know you do it very well in the paper, but for the audience here.
No, look, Jim, I agree with that, and I thank you for your comments on the paper. We should never lose sight of the fact that what we're doing first and foremost is in the service of deterring aggression and deterring attack. Okay, we're not talking about fighting nuclear war or anything of the sort. What we want to do is we want to prevent attack. And so modernization of our offensive nuclear strategic forces is important to deterrence, first and foremost. Improving our nationwide defenses against missile attack is important for deterrence. And again, I come back to the point I made earlier. Okay, if you can be 100% confident that deterrence will work now and well into the future, then maybe you take a different view of it. I personally don't believe that deterrence will always work under all circumstances at all times against all possible adversaries. That's not a prediction that deterrence will fail, but it is to say missile defenses are like an insurance policy. Okay, I don't think my home is going to be destroyed by a hurricane or a tornado anytime soon, but I have a home insurance policy, just in case. And I think we should be looking at homeland missile defense the same way. Homeland. We protect our homes, our individual homes. Why shouldn't we protect our homeland the same way? It's an insurance policy. It does contribute to deterrence because protection would complicate the attack plans of any potential aggressor. They'd have to think twice. The arguments that, well, we can't build a defense that's 100% effective all the time. We don't need a 100% effective deterrent. Okay, that's the wrong question. It's the wrong answer. It's the wrong argument. The defense only needs to be able to put doubt in the mind of an aggressor that an attack will not accomplish whatever military or other objectives the aggressor seeks to accomplish. That's the purpose of this. And I think sometimes those nuances are lost in the debate, in the public debate over whether we should go forward with missile defenses or not, whether it's stabilizing or destabilizing, those kinds of issues. And so first and foremost, I think we need to understand what this argument and what this debate is all about, and why we're doing the kinds of things, at least I'm proposing, that we should do.
Well, Dave, that's an excellent monologue actually to end this discussion, because you've wrapped it up and brought out those important parts, which I think get lost oftentimes when we get into the details. And so I thank you for your discussion here, for being a part of NIDS and coming to our Huessy seminars. I'm going to turn this back to Kimberly, who's going to close us out and give us the final on this. But Dave, I can't thank you enough for all you do for our nation, for putting your thoughts and ideas to paper, but also to voice on shows like this. And so, Kimberly, I'm going to turn this over to you. Well, I'll give you a last word if you wish to have it.
Listen, Chip. Let me thank you again. I want to thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts here. I want to thank NIDS for everything that you all have been doing in this area to sort of raise consciousness and understanding of these issues. And I want to thank those who joined on the call. To hear the discussion. I hope what I said made at least a little bit of sense to those on the call. But I appreciate I just appreciate being here, and thank you all for the opportunity.
Excellent. Let me turn it over to Kimberly to close us out.
Thanks everyone for being here. Again, you can go to thinkdeterrence.com to find out our upcoming programs. We have them almost weekly, the Huessy seminars, and special attention to our 2 live events coming up at the Capitol Hill Club, which those invitations will be out soon. And make sure to help us spread the word. Feel free to email us at nids@thinkdeterrence.com so that we can invite the people on your team to come to this programming here. And thank you. I hope you all have a nice weekend. Thank you so much, Mr. Trachtenberg, for being here. And
A pleasure.
we want to remind all of you to think deterrence.
Thank you, Kimberly.